Monica Williams woke up early that morning, just like she always did. The sound of her alarm clock pulled her from her light sleep, and she quickly reached over to turn it off. She sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her eyes gently, letting her mind prepare for another long day in court. To most people, she was Judge Williams, a woman of authority, fairness, and discipline. But to herself, she was still just Monica, a girl who once grew up in a small neighborhood where dreams felt too far away. She had worked hard to reach this position in life. Every decision, every late night of study in law school, every sacrifice had built her reputation. People respected her for her wisdom and the way she treated everyone equally, whether they were rich, poor, guilty, or innocent. Monica carried her role with pride, but sometimes, behind the calm and serious face she wore in court, she longed for moments of simplicity, the laughter of her childhood, the friends she once had, and the innocence of days gone by. That morning felt no different from the others, at least at first. She drank her coffee while going through the case files she had to review. Today's schedule looked heavy, with a new trial that was expected to last for weeks. The defendant had been accused of a serious crime, and the courtroom would be filled with lawyers, witnesses, and a restless audience waiting for justice. Monica was prepared for it, at least in her professional mind. But she had no idea that this day would bring her face to face with a piece of her past she thought she had left behind forever. By mid-morning, Monica walked into the courthouse, her black robe flowing gracefully as she moved with quiet confidence. People greeted her respectfully, and she nodded politely, keeping her expression firm. When she entered the courtroom, the sound of voices lowered instantly. The attorneys stood, the clerks hurried into place, and all eyes shifted toward her. She sat down at her bench, adjusted her glasses, and prepared to call the session to order. "Bring in the defendant," the bailiff's voice echoed through the room. The doors at the side of the courtroom opened, and a man was escorted inside. Monica glanced up, expecting just another face in a long line of defendants she had seen in her career. But when her eyes settled on him, her heart froze. It couldn't be. Her breath caught in her chest as she stared at the man standing before her. His face carried the lines of age, his eyes were weary, and his posture spoke of a life burdened by hardship. But beneath all of that, she recognized him instantly. David Johnson. Memories rushed into her mind, uninvited and unstoppable. David was not just another person. He was the boy she once loved, the boy who used to walk her home from school, the one who made her laugh when the world felt heavy, the one who promised her under the summer stars that he would always protect her. She remembered the afternoons they spent sitting on the steps of his grandmother's porch, talking about dreams that felt bigger than their small neighborhood. He had wanted to be an artist, someone who painted the world in colors no one else could see. She had wanted to be a lawyer, someone who stood for truth and fairness. Back then, they believed nothing could separate them. But life had different plans. She remembered the painful day they parted ways. She had received her scholarship to study law in another city, while David stayed behind, trying to find his path. At first, they wrote letters, called each other when they could, and promised they would make it work. But as time passed, the calls grew fewer, the letters stopped, and their lives moved in different directions. She never forgot him, but she buried those memories deep, convinced they were part of a closed chapter. And now, here he was. Not the boy with dreams in his eyes, but a man standing before her in a courtroom, accused of something serious. The robe she wore reminded her she was no longer just Monica, the girl from the neighborhood. She was Judge Williams, and everyone expected her to carry herself with fairness and control. Yet, for the first time in her career, her heart battled her mind in silence. She gripped the wooden edge of her bench slightly tighter, steadying herself. Her face showed no sign of the storm inside her. She forced her voice to remain calm as she read out the details of the case. But each word she spoke seemed to echo louder in her own head, clashing with the memories of David's laughter, his warmth, and the boy he used to be. David lifted his eyes briefly, and when their gazes met, time seemed to stop. Recognition flashed across his face. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say her name, but the weight of the courtroom silenced him. For a second, Monica saw not the man accused, but the boy who once held her hand when she was afraid. The room around them carried on as usual. The lawyers shuffled papers, the clerk noted details, and the audience whispered among themselves. But inside Monica, it felt like two worlds were colliding. The professional world demanded her attention, but the personal world was screaming louder than it had in years. As the first few testimonies were prepared, Monica leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression thoughtful yet composed. She wondered silently, what had happened to him? What road had led him here? How did the boy she once knew become the man standing in court today? She didn't have answers, but she knew one thing: this trial would be unlike any other she had faced. The courtroom continued its rhythm, but Monica's heart refused to calm. She felt both the burden of her role and the pull of her past. She reminded herself that justice was her duty, and fairness her responsibility. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the simple truth today: she was not just a judge. She was also a woman who had unexpectedly met her past in the most shocking way possible. The trial moved forward, and Monica tried to keep her focus on the facts presented before her. Lawyers spoke with passion, witnesses waited nervously, and the jury sat in silence, ready to listen. From the outside, it seemed like an ordinary case, but for Monica, it was anything but ordinary. Every glance at the defendant's table brought back old memories she thought she had locked away years ago. She watched David sit quietly, his hands folded in front of him. He no longer had the easy smile she remembered from their youth. His shoulders looked heavier now, not just from age but from the burdens he had carried. His eyes, though tired, still held a glimmer of the boy she once knew, the boy who used to sketch pictures on the back of his school notebooks, the one who dreamed of painting murals that told stories of their neighborhood. As testimony after testimony was presented, Monica found herself drifting into the past. It was not something she planned, but memories rose inside her like waves, uninvited and unstoppable. She remembered the narrow streets of their childhood neighborhood, the laughter of children playing tag, and the small corner store where she and David used to buy candy with the few coins they saved. David was always kind, even as a boy. When other kids argued or fought, he was the one who tried to make peace. He had a gentle way of calming people down, and Monica admired that about him. She also remembered how he had believed in her when she doubted herself. There were nights when she cried over her books, afraid she wasn't smart enough to achieve her dreams. But David always told her she could do it. He would say, "Monica, you're stronger than you think. You're going to make it, and one day, the world will know your name." Those words stayed with her long after he was gone. As the court continued, Monica wondered what had happened to him after she left for college. She knew life in their neighborhood was hard. Many young men struggled to find steady work, and opportunities were rare. Some turned to bad choices just to survive, while others got caught in situations they never intended. She couldn't help but wonder if David had been one of them, or if life had simply been unfair to him. The lawyer began questioning a witness, and Monica leaned forward to listen. The words filled the air, but in the back of her mind, she still saw images of the past. She thought about the day she boarded the bus to leave for college. David had walked her to the station. His eyes were full of pride, but also sadness. "Don't forget me," he had whispered as he hugged her tightly. She had promised she never would. And she hadn't. But life had pulled them apart anyway. At first, they wrote letters. His handwriting was messy but full of warmth. He told her about small things: the basketball games he played with friends, the way the neighborhood kids still looked up to him, how he was trying to save money for art supplies. She wrote back about her classes, the professors who challenged her, and the long nights of studying. For a while, it felt like distance couldn't break their bond. But then the letters came less often. Phone calls were harder to make. Her studies consumed her days, while David's life seemed to grow more complicated. She could feel the distance widening, even though neither of them wanted it. Eventually, the letters stopped altogether. She buried herself in her work, convincing herself that success demanded sacrifice. Yet, somewhere deep inside, she always wondered what became of him. Now she was looking at the answer, though it wasn't the answer she wanted. Seeing him in court, in this position, was painful. She wondered if she could have done something differently back then. Could she have helped him? Could she have stayed in touch more? The questions burned quietly in her heart, though she knew they were useless now. David looked up occasionally, and each time, their eyes met. He never spoke, but the look he gave her said everything. It was a mixture of surprise, sadness, and something unspoken, maybe regret, maybe longing, maybe both. Monica had to quickly shift her gaze away to keep her composure. She was the judge, and the courtroom was watching. The attorneys pressed on, each one trying to prove their side of the story. Monica listened carefully, reminding herself of her duty. But beneath her calm exterior, her thoughts were tangled between the past and the present. She remembered how protective David had been. When they were teenagers, he had once stood up for her when some older kids teased her. He had faced them without fear, and afterward, he told her, "I'd never let anyone hurt you." That memory brought tears to her eyes now, though she blinked them away before anyone could notice. The sound of the gavel in her hand brought her back to the present moment. The courtroom was alive with voices, but inside her, silence roared. She knew she had to walk a careful line. She could not let her personal feelings interfere with her responsibility. Yet she also could not erase the truth: this man was not just another defendant. He was a part of her life story. The session broke for a short recess, and Monica took a deep breath as she stepped into her chambers. Alone in the quiet room, she sat at her desk and pressed her hands together. She thought about her parents, how proud they would be to see her now. She thought about her younger self, the girl who had walked through the same rough streets as David, but had found a way out. And she thought about him, the boy who once promised her forever, now sitting in a courtroom, waiting for her judgment. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. The past felt heavy, almost too heavy to carry. But she knew this was only the beginning of the trial. More evidence would come, more stories would be told, and the truth would slowly unfold. She couldn't predict how it would end, but she knew one thing for certain: this was not just a case. This was a test of her strength, her fairness, and her heart. When recess ended, Monica returned to the bench, her face calm once more. She tapped the gavel lightly, and the courtroom fell silent again. She looked at David, then at the lawyers, then at the jury. Her voice was steady as she spoke, but deep inside, her heart whispered the memories of a love long lost. The painful past had returned, and there was no escaping it now. The trial continued into its next days, and each moment became heavier for Monica. On the outside, she was steady as ever, her face calm and unreadable, her voice firm but fair. Inside, however, she was fighting a storm. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every glance at David reminded her that this was not just another trial. It was a battle between her duty as a judge and her emotions as a woman who once loved the man standing before her. The courtroom was filled with whispers as the defense pushed harder. They highlighted the weaknesses in the prosecution's story, pointing out contradictions that made the jury lean forward in their seats. Monica listened with sharp focus, her pen moving across the paper, jotting down details. But behind that focus, her heart was restless. She knew her job required her to remain neutral, to see only the facts. Yet the facts were now tied to a person she once knew deeply. At night, when she returned home, Monica found herself sitting in silence for hours. The quiet of her house felt heavier than usual. She would pour herself a glass of water, sit by the window, and let her thoughts wander. She remembered their teenage years, when David would walk beside her under the streetlights, talking about how one day they would escape the struggles of their neighborhood. He had dreamed of opening a small art studio, while she dreamed of becoming a lawyer. They used to laugh at how different their dreams were, yet how perfectly they fit together. Now she wondered, when had those dreams broken apart? When had the boy with hope in his eyes become the man fighting for his freedom in her courtroom? The thought pained her, but she forced herself to stay grounded. I am a judge, she whispered to herself in the empty room. I must be fair. It was a reminder she repeated often, like a prayer. Back in court, the prosecution fought to regain control. They presented more evidence, documents, and testimonies to prove their case. Monica examined every detail carefully, but deep down, she knew there was doubt. She could see the jury noticing it too, the way they whispered among themselves, the way their expressions shifted when contradictions were revealed. The case was no longer as strong as it first appeared. But still, the law required balance. Monica knew that if she showed even the smallest sign of bias, her decision could be questioned. And so, every time David's eyes met hers, she quickly looked away, keeping her face unreadable. She wanted to offer him a smile of comfort, a reminder that she still saw the boy she once loved, but she could not. Her robe was more than cloth, it was responsibility. One afternoon, during a particularly tense moment in court, David's lawyer asked him another set of questions. He spoke again about his life, about how he had tried to survive after losing jobs, after doors kept closing. His words were raw and honest, and Monica felt the weight of every syllable. The courtroom listened, some moved to sympathy, others skeptical. Monica's heart pulled at her, whispering, "He is telling the truth. You know him. You know his heart." But her mind reminded her, this is a court of law. Truth must be proven, not assumed. The conflict burned inside her. That evening, Monica visited her parents' old house. It was empty now, but walking through it brought her comfort. She remembered being young, sitting at the kitchen table with David, laughing as they shared meals with her family. Her parents had loved him, seen the goodness in him. He has a kind soul, her mother used to say. The memory brought tears to Monica's eyes. She wondered what her mother would think now, if she could see David standing trial. Would she still see the same kind soul? The trial stretched on, and Monica grew weary from the weight of her thoughts. Yet, she never allowed her personal feelings to show. Each day she entered the courtroom with the same steady walk, the same calm expression. The lawyers respected her fairness, the jury followed her lead, and the audience admired her control. No one knew the battle she fought within. On the fourth week of the trial, a surprise witness came forward, an old neighbor who had known both David and Monica during their youth. The neighbor's testimony was simple but powerful. He described David as someone who had always helped others, someone who looked out for children in the community, someone who never sought trouble. His words painted a picture of the boy Monica remembered, and for a moment, she had to steady herself to keep her emotions hidden. The prosecution tried to discredit the testimony, but Monica could see the effect it had on the jury. They were beginning to see David not as a criminal, but as a man with a story. A man whose life had been shaped by circumstances beyond his control. As the trial neared its final stage, Monica spent sleepless nights thinking about the closing arguments. She knew her verdict would be remembered, not just because of the case itself, but because of who David was to her. She felt trapped between two worlds, the world of justice, where facts ruled, and the world of memory, where love once lived. In those quiet hours, she realized something important. Her duty was not to save David because of who he had been to her. Her duty was to search for truth, no matter how complicated. She promised herself she would not let her heart cloud her judgment, but she would also not let fear silence her from seeing what was real. The final week of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was tense with anticipation. The lawyers gave their closing arguments, each one fighting with passion. The prosecution argued for punishment, insisting the evidence was enough. The defense pleaded for justice, pointing out the gaps and the doubts. Monica listened carefully, her eyes on the papers before her, but her mind wide open. She saw both sides clearly, weighed every piece, and measured every word. When the final arguments ended, she dismissed the court for the day. That evening, she stood in front of the mirror at home, looking at herself in the judge's robe. She thought about the little girl she once was, sitting on her bed with books piled high, dreaming of this very role. She thought about David, the boy who once told her she could do it, the boy who believed in her before she believed in herself. Now, here she was, torn between the heart of Monica and the duty of Judge Williams. The trial was almost over. Soon, she would have to give her ruling. And whatever she decided, it would not only change David's life, but also hers. The final day of the trial arrived with heavy skies, as though even the weather understood the weight of what was about to happen. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with people who had followed the case from the beginning. Journalists scribbled in their notepads, cameras clicked outside the doors, and families of both sides whispered in low voices. The air was tense, carrying both hope and fear. Monica walked into the courtroom with her usual calm step. The black robe flowed around her, and though her face was composed, her heart was beating harder than usual. She had spent the entire night going over the case in her mind, reviewing every detail, every testimony, and every piece of evidence. She knew the responsibility that rested on her shoulders. It was not just about the law anymore, it was about a man's future, a man she once loved, and the truth she was sworn to protect. David sat quietly at the defendant's table, his hands folded, his head slightly lowered. He looked tired, but there was something different in his eyes today, perhaps a mixture of fear and hope. Monica noticed it, though she quickly turned her attention to the jury as they filed back into the room. Their expressions were serious, unreadable, as they prepared to give their decision. The courtroom stood still when the jury foreman rose with the verdict slip in hand. Monica's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady as she asked for the decision to be read aloud. The foreman's words echoed through the silent courtroom, each syllable striking like a drum beat. When the verdict was announced, a wave of murmurs swept through the room. Some gasped, others sighed with relief, and a few shook their heads in disbelief. Monica listened with a calm face, but inside, her emotions swirled. The verdict leaned toward David's freedom. The jury had decided there was not enough solid evidence to convict him. Doubt, they said, was too strong. For a moment, the room was filled with mixed emotions. The prosecution looked disappointed, their shoulders slumping under the weight of defeat. The defense lawyer closed his eyes briefly, then placed a hand on David's shoulder. David himself sat frozen, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Slowly, he raised his head and looked toward Monica. Their eyes met, and in that instant, no words were needed. She saw gratitude in his gaze, and perhaps even a silent thank you for the fairness she had shown. Monica tapped her gavel gently, bringing the room back to order. She reminded everyone that justice had spoken and that the decision was final. Her voice was calm and strong, though her heart was still racing. When the session ended, the courtroom erupted into whispers and hurried footsteps. Reporters rushed outside to deliver the news, families embraced or argued, and the weight of the case slowly lifted from the room. David was escorted out of the courtroom, though now without the chains that had bound him before. His steps were slower, almost hesitant, as though he was still trying to understand his new freedom. Monica remained at her bench until the room was nearly empty. Only when the last lawyer left did she allow herself to breathe deeply. Later that evening, as the courthouse grew quiet, Monica stepped out into the cool night air. The sky was dark, dotted with stars, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the tension leave her shoulders. She walked down the steps slowly, lost in thought, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Monica." She turned, and there he was. David stood a few steps away, no longer wearing the expression of a man on trial but still carrying the weariness of someone who had been through too much. He hesitated, as if unsure whether he should approach. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence heavy with years of unspoken words. Finally, Monica nodded, giving him permission to come closer. "I don't know what to say," David began, his voice low but steady. "Thank you doesn't feel enough." Monica shook her head gently. "You don't need to thank me. The jury made their decision. My duty was only to make sure the trial was fair." David studied her, his eyes soft but searching. "Still," he said quietly, "I know it wasn't easy for you. Seeing me there, after all these years." Monica looked away briefly, her gaze settling on the courthouse behind them. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "But it reminded me of something important, that behind every case, there's a human being with a story. And sometimes, the truth is hidden beneath all the noise." There was a pause, filled with memories neither of them had spoken of yet. David finally asked, "Do you ever think about us? About what we were back then?" Monica smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "Every now and then," she said softly. "We were just kids, but those memories stayed with me. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I never forgot that." David's voice grew quiet. "And I never forgot you. Even when life took me down roads I never wanted, I still remembered the girl who dreamed big." The honesty in his words touched her, and for a moment, Monica felt like the young girl again, standing beside him under the streetlights of their old neighborhood. But time had passed, and they were no longer those children. "I don't know what comes next for me," David admitted. "But I want to try again. I want to rebuild, to find something better." Monica nodded firmly. "You should. This verdict gave you a chance, David. Don't waste it. You still have time to write a new chapter." They stood there for a while, two people connected by the past, changed by the present, and uncertain of the future. Then, gently, David extended his hand. Monica hesitated only for a second before taking it. It was not the handshake of strangers, nor the embrace of lovers. It was the quiet understanding of two souls who had once shared dreams and who now, after years apart, had found peace in seeing each other again. As David walked away into the night, Monica stood under the stars, watching him go. Her heart was heavy yet lighter at the same time. She knew their lives were separate now, but the trial had given them something precious: the chance to face the past, to forgive, and to move forward. When Monica finally returned home, she looked at herself in the mirror once more. The robe was gone, and she was just Monica again. A woman who had loved, lost, and learned. A woman who understood that justice was not only about laws but also about humanity. She turned off the light, sat by the window, and whispered a silent prayer for David, for herself, and for the future. The trial was over, but its lessons would stay with her forever. And in that quiet night, she realized something powerful: sometimes, the most shocking part of life is not the verdict itself, but the way the heart finds strength in the face of impossible choices.